Hi there, I'm your host Marlene McConnell and welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. In this week's episode, I am thrilled to welcome the lovely Alexandra Wyman to the podcast, who is joining me from her home in Colorado, United States. Alexandra is an advocate and public speaker for resources in the aftermath of suicide. She believes that we have to heal the past to heal the present. After she lost her husband to suicide in August 2020, Alexandra found a need to change the language around suicide and decided to write about it. Her memoir, The Suicide Club: What to Do When Someone You Love Chooses Death, instantly became an Amazon bestseller. She shares that writing a book was cathartic and helped her through the healing process. It offered her an opportunity to reflect on what healing she needed. Now, through her work, she hopes to help others start taking baby steps towards healing and find joy again. It has been my pleasure to have Alexandra join me on the podcast. Thank you to my listeners for joining me on this journey. Comment on the posts on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn and let me know what you think of this episode. Also head to Amazon.com or takealot.com and get your copy of my book, Ray of Light, and please leave me a rating and review. It would mean the world to me. Also, please check out my website and download your free journal prompt and relaxing meditation on the resources page. As always, stay tuned and keep listening. Hi, Alexandra. Welcome to Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope. I'm so happy that you can join me today. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you so much for having me today. It's such a wonderful opportunity to speak with you today, Marlene. And I'm doing very well. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
That's awesome. So you're all the way out in Colorado, a beautiful part of the U.S., a part in the U.S. that I definitely have to visit. I've only ever heard beautiful things about it. Have you always lived in Colorado?
Not always. My family's been based here for, I think almost 30 years now. I'm originally from California and then moved around a little bit, but definitely finished off school here in Colorado and then came back after traveling quite a bit. So definitely where I call home.
Okay. Nothing gets to what they say. Home is where the heart is. Or in your case, or in my case, home is where the mountain is.
Right? Yes. There's a whole theory here that people who stay here in Colorado and then try and move away will always come back.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because I've actually heard that before. In fact, I've heard someone say, Marlene, these mountains in Colorado raised me.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, I like that a lot.
So, Alexandra, you are a grief navigator. You're an author. You've recently published your new memoir, The Suicide Club: What to Do When Someone You Love Chooses Death. You also speak publicly on prevention of suicide. And these are important topics for people who have suffered a loss like that and who are experiencing grief following such a loss. Your story is a personal one because even though you do the work as a grief navigator, you have a personal story that feeds into the work that you do because you lost your husband in August of 2020. Do you want to share some of what had happened at the time and how that came about?
Sure. So Sean and I had been married just under 2 years, and we just had a very strong connection when we met and just felt that our souls we just knew each other. And it was one of those where you sit and have a conversation and go, I feel like I've known you for years kind of situation. And about 4 days before our second wedding anniversary is when Sean went missing for several hours and then ended up dying by suicide. And I knew pretty early on that particular day that something was wrong. And I honestly knew that this was what was happening. And then spent 6 hours trying to find him, trying to get other people to look for him, see if we could intervene. And it just ended up not working out in that particular way. And so he did end up ending his life. And I think, life doesn't discriminate. It just things happen, and that wasn't really the trajectory, obviously, that I thought my life was going to go in. We had a very good life together. And just like any relationship or marriage, there are things that come up. And by no means am I saying my marriage had anything to do with his death, but there were stressors related to that. There were other stresses in Sean's life. And in no way did I expect that the result was going to be just having the rug pulled out from underneath me the way it was, and feeling like everything that I had known of my life had just turned to rubble. And so there was a lot of additional trauma and drama that happened just because of how people react to such a difficult time. And through that, I found, the support I thought I was going to have from some people, I didn't. The support I didn't think I was going to have from others, I did. And I also just decided this is awful and I don't want another person to feel the way that I've been feeling. So I just started jotting down notes of what my experience was, what I was able to glean from tips and tricks that worked for me. And it ended up turning into a book, which I never thought I would write, but it ended up turning into that. And I've been grateful along this journey that I've been able to do that.
I'm happy that you were actually able to turn this into such an instrument that you could share with others. We've gone through something similar. I remember reading in your book, I think it's chapter 3, Trail of Destruction, where you talk about the different stages of grief. How you mentioned that Sean disappeared that day and he went up into the mountains.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think he shot himself. He died by suicide, but he made that decision without you. And that for me, like, it was so striking when I read that, because we never think about it,
Mm-hmm.
when we hear of suicide, that this was something that had happened or a decision that was taken without us. It's always something that happened sort of externally and that we hear of after the fact. But I never actually thought of it, that this was actually a decision without me. This was something that I almost feel like you were saying I should have had a say in that. Do you want to expand a bit on that?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to put it in the mindset of it was a choice. And we often try and project, and this is very natural to do. We project our own ideas about decision making onto other people. Well, I wouldn't make that decision. I get that you did, but I wouldn't. And we use our own filters to do that projection. And so for me, I had to shift my mindset with Sean and say he made a decision with all the information that he had, as distorted or off or however you want to describe it. He made that decision. And in that moment, to end his pain, this was his ultimate choice. And putting it back on the onus on him that this was his choice versus it was my duty to save him really helped in my healing process. Of course, I still have days where I'm like, I should have done this or that, or maybe if I had done this, a different outcome would have happened, or a different outcome might not have happened. We just don't know. And just the same as I used the information I had that day to make the choices I did for how I handled things. And then there is a part of me that, yes, he made this choice without me. And I think I still carry some sadness that he went through this alone. So often if partners are dying or something's coming, they have someone with them. And it makes me sad to know that he went through all of this and that I couldn't be there with him while he took his last breath. And that's honestly, that's how suicide is. But that's what kind of struck me about this is he had to go through it by himself and took his last breath without me there.
Mm-hmm. And you're right that usually when we do come to the transitioning point of our life, we normally have our loved ones there. But this is something deeply private to him that he only wanted to keep for himself. So, when you lose a loved one to suicide, something that you mentioned was, what could I have done on that day? What could I have done different? How could I have handled it different? Thinking about your marriage. I think it's important for anyone to know that loses a loved one in this way, that this is not your fault, that this is a decision that the person made
by themselves. Did you experience that you kind of, pondered about it like you mentioned, but that you kind of put some self-blame onto yourself? Or did you early on realize that this was not really your fault?
Oh, it took me a long time. I definitely took on the blame. There were others around me who were also assisting with blaming me for it. So it was very easy for me to think that I must have somehow contributed to his death, that it must have been a direct relation to the argument we had the morning that he died or what was going on. I mean, 2 days before he died, we were planning a vacation. So, I mean, there's all sorts of emotions that come with it because it's irrational. It's completely irrational. And the grief that comes with it is completely irrational. And what I found though, and I had a therapist early on, and she was great because at one point she said, if you could quiet everything around you, what do you know about your relationship with Sean? And that really helped me start to peel back those layers in order to go, I'm not to blame for this. I wasn't as awful as people say that I was. Sure, I had my own insecurities. Of course, there are things I would have done differently. And even now, almost 3 years later, I'm still reflecting on how I could have been a different person then. And I wasn't. And I have to work through that guilt now. But at the same time, really working through and again saying, it's not fair to him for me to constantly apply judgment on his choice. He made that choice. I don't agree with it. I still don't agree with it. But it takes away that idea of that free will or him having a say over his life. And this, as you said, this was his ultimate choice. And again, coming from a place of wanting to end, I look at it in the purview of coming from a place of wanting to end an immense amount of pain. And in that respect, I can't even blame him for that. Like, I'm not in your position. I haven't been in his position to be in that much pain that the only decision I think that's left for me is to end my life.
And it's hard to think of that suffering that he must have endured to come to that conclusion.
Yes. Yeah.
Alexandra, when we talk about, losing someone, in your book, there's so many, I mean, when I was going through the book, I mean, if you've ever experienced grief in your life, there's so much that just resonates, and something else that just resonated with me was the chapter that you wrote on the business stuff, like what happens afterward, because when something like this happens, an event like this happens in your life, there's always all the support and there's the arrangement. So there's a lot of distractions. But at some point, everything starts to quiet down. And then you got to decide what comes next. What did that look like for you when you started to come to those quiet moments when, the food didn't come anymore?
Oh, I was a hot mess. Exactly like you're saying. I mean, there's only so long that people are going to be supportive, and the hard part is, and I get this, the hard part is people were looking for me to direct them on how to help, and I didn't have the capacity to tell them exactly how they could help. So often I would say, just drop food on my porch. Just drop food on my porch. Sometimes I did say, I have to make these phone calls. Can you help me keep a list? And so it's just, for me, I was just a hot mess because you're right. Stuff starts to quiet and it's like, wait a second, where are you all going? Like, my life is still in shambles. I have no idea what's going to happen day to day. I have fears coming from all different directions, anxiety coming from all different directions. I have this massive hole in my heart. And yet everyone's, going back to, it's almost a little bit, the way I think of it is like everyone's just going back to their Pleasantville, nice cookie cutter life, whereas mine's the house that just had a bomb hit it, like just, okay, this is awful. And really what I had to do is I'm someone where I just thought, okay, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to get through it. And grief is not something that you can speed up. And I had another therapist who said that to me very early on, is like, I'm not going to, he's like, I'm not going to work with you for a while. You got to let your grief set in a little bit. And so once I could slow down and start pacing, which I still have days where I'm like, oh, I need to slow down a little bit.
That's
I need to
right.
really embrace and
And that's
feel
the
what I'm
hard
feeling
part,
instead of
Alexandra,
resisting what I'm
to really
feeling.
sit in those emotions, and because they're so uncomfortable and painful.
Oh, it's horrible. No, I mean, and I try and be as honest as possible when it comes to this, because I absolutely believe that when you get to the other side of these horrible feelings, it is so freeing. I try to put words to it.
Yeah.
It's just the relationship I have with my environment and the world and my life is very different. And there's just a sense of understanding that's different, a sense of meaning that's different. But I can't get there, and I wasn't able to get
Yeah.
here until I actually faced the horrible feelings. And they don't feel good. And of course, I understand wanting to not face them or ignore them or, use numbing techniques, which I did. I would binge watch film. I would do all sorts of things to try and avoid. And once I stopped and said, nope, I have to face this, and I started to feel what it felt like to really heal and get through things, I thought, oh, it's a whole different story over here. Still really hard to do, but so worth it.
Yeah. Sitting in those emotions and processing it and really getting through that. Once you've done that, you enter a place of liberation. Then, you can actually start giving that compassion to yourself.
Absolutely.
Because I think when we grieve, there's a small part of us that must forgive ourselves too and treat ourselves with compassion.
Yes. And it's so interesting that this is coming up today, because this actually is a theme that's been coming up for me personally over the last couple weeks, where I've had more feelings come up where I, like I said, have been feeling more guilt and shame, and I've been trying to work through those and use my support system to do so, to get to that point of additional freedom, and to know, it doesn't stop. It's not like the grief process doesn't stop. It does like morph and change. And then every once in a while, you'll have more that will come up, which is great because it indicates that there's more growth for me to do.
Yeah.
But I love that, I just love that you're bringing that up, because I'm like, yes, 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 and yes.
Yeah. As you say, the grief process, it keeps on going. And as I was working through your book, I was looking at the chapter called Now What? And I think, once we work through all of this and we get to that place, we do I think we ask ourselves, even after the experience of trauma, where to from here? What do I do with my life? And you managed to actually transform that into something so beautiful where you could give guidance to others that have experienced grief. So what did that transition look like for you?
Oh, that one was another hot mess. This whole I think that's a big, if you want a theme or a tidbit to take from this, just embrace the hot mess. Just embrace it. It was hard because, like I was saying earlier, and like you were mentioning, people are going back to their lives, and we have to go back to our lives, right?
Yeah.
And I can say where we are, there's not a lot of time you get for bereavement. People are uncomfortable talking about death. They don't know what to do. So we just don't get a lot of time to actually sit in that. Luckily, I had a work situation that provided me an opportunity to take a little bit more time. But you're just in two different worlds. You're in a world where you have to get up and you have to adult and get, I had to get my son to school. I had to make sure that or to daycare. I had to make sure that I was getting up. I was performing these work things. I don't remember much of what I did then. And at the same time, I am walking around with this massive fog of grief. And I call it fog because sometimes fog will kind of dissipate a little bit and a little bit of sun will come through and then the clouds come right back over. And that's how I just felt for me.
Yeah.
The process was where it's just, I'm walking around with this rain cloud all the time, a little bit of sun that comes through every once in a while also almost feeling like I had to put on an appearance that things were fine, right? People do better around us when we're fine. They don't like it when we're not fine because they can't fix it.
But, and it's interesting that you would say that, because we sometimes have to teach people how to treat us. because people don't know how to relate to you, how to talk to you, what they can say, what they can't
Yes.
say, what they can ask you, what they can't ask you. And I know from personal experience that it's always helpful, as difficult as it is, because, like you say, you're in the midst of this fog, and you're trying to, sit one foot in front of the other to get through your day and get back to, your quality of life. That it's important to take that time to actually address that and say, it's okay if you want to talk. It's okay if you want to ask me something. Is that something that you found that you had to do to help people to relate to you better after your husband's passing?
I'm still learning that. I'll be honest. It's taken me a while to get to a point of really understanding what it means to teach people. Because for a while, I would just get frustrated and say, why are you saying that to me? Or that's not what I need, or that's not helpful, versus switching again that mindset to, oh, they just don't know because it's super uncomfortable. And now it's almost the flip side, where I talk about this all the time. I'm very open about Sean's death. I'm open about my situation. And sometimes I catch people off guard and I go, oh, I'm so sorry. I dropped that one on you. Sorry. And have to backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
But I am still learning
Yeah.
how to be more of that teacher for people in order to help guide them and also put them at ease. Like, it's okay to be uncomfortable around me. I'm just a person. I'm not broken. You don't have to fix me. And I forget that in the moment, because then I get nervous, like, oh no, I just offended someone, or I just said something. And but yeah, I'm still working on being able to take advantage of those moments in order to help people feel more comfortable in approaching me and just being able to talk about death in general. See, how has it been for you teaching, going through that and being able to relate to other people?
If I look at some of the experiences, I'll use my cancer diagnosis as an example, rather than grief. Everyone was very uncomfortable around me after I was diagnosed, because they didn't know what to say. They didn't know if they could ask anything. And because it was going through the treatments, it made people very uncomfortable. Even though they came to visit, you could see that. But I just decided to take the lead and talk about things openly, because that gave them the freedom in those moments to then ask questions. And then they could see that I was comfortable with it. So it wasn't that, they had to tiptoe around me because of this disease and because of the treatment. Because if I look at, where I have suffered grief at the loss of my brother, my parents didn't tell us, how the dynamic would change, and what we could ask and what we couldn't ask, and what we could say and we couldn't say. And so, the rest of the siblings, we just kind of felt forgotten. And so we didn't say very much. We didn't ask very much about his death, because we knew it would make my mom sad. And so, we started to avoid talking about it. And it wasn't until, many years when it was more acceptable, when my parents came to terms with his death, that they started saying, okay, no, it's okay now to speak and ask questions. And I think the thing about grief also, Alexandra, is that it's transient. I think that we feel that in those moments, the passing of a loved one, or whether it's a diagnosis, when we're grieving part of our life that's no longer there, I think it's we feel like we need to carry this burden and we need to be sad. And if we're not crying, then it's not the right thing to do. We're not honoring that person. But, I find that it's actually transient. You could actually smile, and you can cry, and you can be happy, and you can be sad, and it can all happen at once. And that's okay.
Yes. I haven't used the word transient, but I love that. I think that says it so perfectly, because exactly what you're saying, I think so often we look for those linear steps. Well, I feel this, and then this is going to come. We like that predictability, and it's not. And you are so right. I mean, I was so overwhelmed. I remember one of the first times that I actually paid attention to the fact that in a very short amount of time, I felt a lot of emotion, and they were opposite to each other. And it was all at once. I mean, it was very overwhelming. And I remember having to
Yeah.
stop myself and just because I was resisting, like, which way am I going? Am I sad? Am I happy? I'm laughing. Like, just like you're saying, I'm angry. I want to punch something. I want to
Yeah.
scream. All of this in such a short amount of time. And then stopping and
Yeah.
going, oh, that's just grief. Like, and you don't know. I mean, I love that my therapist has said this, and I've heard so many other people say this, that grief and love have an inverse relationship. The amount of grief you have is 100% tied to the amount of love you had. And so to just
Yeah.
feel all of those immense emotions and to have that loss, like I think having such a significant loss gives me a higher appreciation what I still have. But you are spot on with that. All of those feelings, all the feels can come all at once, and
Yeah.
it's a roller coaster unlike any other. And I like roller coasters, but that is a different one. That's a whole different kind of roller
It's
coaster.
different. Yeah. It doesn't hit like the one at the amusement park.
No, if we could somehow encapsulate this grief and the whiplash we get and put it into a ride, I mean, there you go. It'd be like the best ride ever. Mostly, and like, which is maybe without all the sadness, maybe.
Speaking now about my brother, it brought up actually some memories for me. And I know that it's been a few years since Sean's passing, but for me, and this actually extends, to any kind of traumatic experience. But the anniversary of the very first death in this case, the very first holiday, the first Christmas without that person, that's always a time that makes you sort of apprehensive about, the holidays, apprehensive about that person's birthday, feeling a bit of anxiety and stress about having to celebrate without that person. And I know that it can be a very stressful time. Can you remember what that first year was like, navigating, those commemorative times throughout the year?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. I think it was a mix because on the one hand, I was still definitely in a grief fog. My memory was really awful. I still struggled day to day, but getting through those firsts, it's just a noticeable emptiness, a noticeable missing, I guess. Like someone is missing. And I think also what's hard, and I'm still trying to figure this out, is you have holidays the way that you've celebrated them before with your person. And for me, Mother's Day and Father's Day here in the US is hard. I don't like celebrating those. But other holidays, it brings up how you would come together, whatever traditions you had. And there's an opportunity without that person to create new and to figure out how you want to honor that person, if you do want to honor that person, or how you want to handle things. And even now, I still feel like I'm kind of caught in between what we used to do and now this opportunity to create new. But I'd say for that, all the first, it's almost in a way I dreaded them coming because I didn't know what it was going to feel like, but I knew that there was a loss. And at the same time, it was also like almost like a checklist, like, oh, I made it through Christmas. Oh, I made it through this, where you're like, finally, I made it. It was like demonstrating how far I was getting to move through them. And unfortunately, in my mind, I thought, oh, well, if I got through them in the first year, I'm good. Not that they wouldn't impact me after that. But my point in saying that is it's going to impact you differently. Because in one year, you can say, I handled this holiday awesome. And the next year, you're not going to handle it awesome. But yeah, it was a little bit of a mix of I just want to get through this. And also, what can I do to honor my person as I'm feeling this gaping hole, just not only in my life, in my heart, and in the traditions we've had.
That first year, I think, is one of the more difficult, but I think you're right that it's not a linear process because we often think that the first year, the first holidays, the first anniversary is the hardest. But actually, the fifth anniversary could also be the hardest. You know, it's not linear. It doesn't. The progression isn't necessarily that it just gets better as time goes along. There can be those setbacks depending on whatever the holiday is or whatever you're commemorating. I love that you say that you have to honor that person and their life in those moments. I think that is a very good way to look at it when we want to say that I don't have you in the present moment and I release you in my past, but I can honor you in the future.
Yes, completely. And I think how we honor changes. And one of the things that's come up for me is also that the way that I choose to honor Sean may not be the way my family or friends want to honor him, or it can morph and change for them as well. And I think that's a big thing for me still now, is trying to figure out as I progress, as I am moving forward, what are the things I can do to still honor him? And honoring him doesn't mean I'm still not grieving or I'm not moving forward. And I think that's a balance I still have to find too, is I'm still going to have hard days, and that's okay. That's kind
Yeah.
of the way it goes. And it's not anything super significant in the big picture of where I am in life. It just means it's a day that came up and I
Yeah.
was like, "Ooh, all right, I think I got to sit with this today." But absolutely, I mean, there are so many different ways
Yeah.
that you can. I heard on a different interview I was doing recently about someone after loss with her kids. They did a bouncy castle and had a table where kids could make condolence cards. And I thought that's awesome. Like, I know for me, I haven't included my son as much in some of this. And this year, I want to do more
Mm-hmm.
and include him a little bit more, so that I wouldn't say he's afraid of death, but I want to make it that it's more normal to talk about death, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. It makes 100% sense. And I also want to say that when it comes to grief, there is no right or wrong way to grieve. We experience small particles of grief in our lives all the time, and none of it is right or wrong. So whatever way it is that you choose to navigate that grief, that is just the way that it is. And so yeah, I think it's just important to highlight that.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that, because I think that's another thing that we can do. I mean, I think as humans, we just project stuff onto each other all the time, but especially our grieving process, or, well, I would do it this way, or I do write about this, I'm a public griever, I'm a private griever. I need to hug people. I don't want people to touch me, and all of it, no matter how it is right. Because if it means that you're working through the feelings, it's right. And it can change daily. I mean, that was the other thing, right? Talk about a concrete thinker. It's like, okay, I'm going to journal every day for hours, and this is going to be my method to get through this. Nope, that worked one day. It didn't work the next day, and finding
Yeah.
what will work the next day, and being open. And
Yeah.
again, just surrendering. I think surrender is such a big part of grieving, is just being able to surrender and ride the ride.
You've touched on some interesting and important tools. I think journaling is an important tool to have. I think when we go through the experience of grief, it's always better when we do surrender to our higher power. And we do understand that this was something beyond our control. Alexandra, as much as that fateful day Sean made that decision, when we surrender, it becomes something that's bigger than us. And I think when we in the grieving process of losing a loved one, it's important to hand that over to our higher
Yes.
power. Were there any other resources that helped you, or that is still helps and aids you in your grieving process? I know that for me, support groups was something that helped me a lot.
Yep. So I've done, oh gosh, so many. And I just jumped down every rabbit hole that I could in order to feel better. But I read books on death. I have watched shows on death. I journal. I've meditated. So I do have a support group I still go to. Very helpful. I've had multiple therapists,
Hmm.
because I luckily found someone who specifically deals with grief. And he's been phenomenal. I've been working with him for almost 2 years now. Um, I'm trying to think. I do include exercise. I do recommend some sort of movement, although my doctor very early on suggested it, and I did not have a very kind reaction to him because I was like, you get out of bed and you go exercise. Like, I am really comfortable in my bed right now. Like, no. But there is value in the movement. I do recognize that. I have done scream therapy.
Yeah.
Yep. I've been the crazy person in my car slamming my steering wheel while screaming, not while driving, while I've been parked.
Yeah.
As the emotions have come up,
Sometimes you just need to let it out,
oh my gosh.
Just in that moment.
Yes. I mean, I probably frightened people who were parked next to me, but in the moment I absolutely needed to get it out. I'm open. I've consulted a medium before, just through my own curiosity. Prayer has been part of it. I mean, every little thing that I could latch on to just feel better, I did. And like I said, all of it has helped in one way or another. And definitely leaning on friends and family, finding my village. I absolutely believe that to get through the grief process, you have to have a village. And my village has morphed and changed even in these 3 years. But you have don't do it by yourself. Just don't.
Yeah. I think having that village is quite important. And I think the important thing is not to isolate yourself, like you said. Looking at your book, the name resonated with me, the Suicide Club, because I could identify immediately. I was like, yeah, I could also belong to this club. Or, because if we look at statistics, we all know someone that at some point in our lives had succumbed by their own hand. So for the listeners who also would like to take advantage of all of this great knowledge that you share in your memoir, where can they find your book?
Oh, yes. So my book is on Amazon, and I also have a website, forwardtojoy.com. So it's all spelled out, and that has a lot of resources. It's got information, any speaking engagements, some of the podcasts I've been doing, and the book is there as well. And then if you want to just connect with me directly, my email is alexandra@forwardtojoy.com. So, and I'm on social media. You can find me there as well. Please connect, or if you have questions or anything, I definitely would love to be able to hear. I like being another tool for people to share their stories and make that connection. So like you said, so people don't feel isolated. The grief is very isolating. So, if I can be just even someone that you feel comfortable reaching out to, please do.
Alexandra, again, I want to say to you my condolences for the passing of Sean. And I wish you and your son all of the best through this process, which is a very difficult process. And I want to commend you for putting pen to paper and putting all of these notes into a book that you can share with the world. And I truly believe that when we put books out into the world, it will find the right people that's meant to hear this message. And I trust that your book will find the right people in this world to help them through their process. And I want to thank you again for joining me and sharing your experiences and your wisdom and providing us insight into your life and tools and tricks and tips on how to navigate grief.
Thank you so much for having me, Marlene. This has been wonderful. And I share the condolences to you as well for the loss of your brother. And I just appreciate all the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're very welcome. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode. Same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.